Picture yourself in a dimly lit theater, curtains drawn as a hush settles over the crowd. The projector rattles to life, beaming out images of a lanky figure in black, guitar in hand, eyes downcast, voice as deep as a river carved by centuries. It's Johnny Cash, the man in black. Most people see him as an American icon, a rebellious saint who sang his way into the hearts of prisoners and pastors alike. They remember his gravelly voice, the memorable duets with June Carter, the concerts at prisons, his unwavering compassion for society's outcasts. Yet behind that legend, behind the somber suits and the unstoppable songs, Johnny Cash was a maelstrom of human contradictions, a man whose life was punctuated by scandal and heartbreak. He soared on the wings of success and plummeted into the depths of addiction, only to rise again, battered but still unbroken, until the day he drew his final breath. This is the story of the darker undercurrents that gave shape to his legend of amphetamine busts, late-night near-deaths, forbidden romance, and the unstoppable spirit that somehow prevailed through it all. He was born J.R. Cash on February 26, 1932, in Kingsland, Arkansas, to a family of cotton farmers scraping by in the Great Depression. Even from those earliest days, there was a tension in him, a longing for something bigger and more profound than the dusty fields under the scorching southern sun. As a boy, he sang to block out the monotony of farm work, forging a bond with music that would become his salvation and later his curse. When he was still a child, his beloved older brother Jack died in a sawmill accident, leaving a hole in young J.R.'s heart. Some say that heartbreak forever tinted his voice with sorrow, that it turned him toward God and shaped the sense of guilt and yearning that coursed through his greatest songs. By the time he was a teen, the family had relocated to Dyess, Arkansas, but rural poverty still hung in the air like a constant weight. In 1950, on the cusp of adulthood, he enlisted in the U.S. Air Force, got stationed in Germany, and discovered the guitar as a friend that never betrayed him. While abroad, he was listening to the crackle of distant radio signals, absorbing country music, gospel tunes, and even hints of rockabilly. After returning to the States, he married Vivian Liberto in 1954. They settled in Memphis, Tennessee, where Cash found work as an appliance salesman while trying to break into the music scene. It was there he teamed up with Luther Perkins and Marshall Grant, forming the Tennessee Two. The group's early recordings for Sun Records, like Hey Porter and Cry, 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 hinted at a distinctive style. Simple, raw, honest, with that trademark boom chicka boom beat. Then came Folsom Prison Blues in 1955, which caught the public's ear with its brazen first line, I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. The country world had never quite heard that kind of starkness, and it resonated. By 1956, I Walk the Line shot to number 1, making him a bona fide star. The success propelled him onto an endless cycle of tours, radio shows, and recording sessions. The boy from Dyess had become a household name, and with that came the pangs of restlessness. The demands were relentless. Promoters wanted him to play night after night. Audiences cheered for more. Struggling to keep pace with that new whirlwind, Cash found a shortcut: amphetamines. The little pills gave him the energy to power through midnight drives and consecutive concerts, to hush the demons of exhaustion. But it was a Faustian bargain. Soon he wasn't just a country star with an edge. He was a man spiraling into a private hell of addiction. By the early 1960s, Cash's amphetamine and barbiturate habit was out of control. He was popping pills so frequently that insomnia and paranoia became constant companions. People around him noticed the changes. The once thoughtful, if melancholy man turned erratic, unpredictable, prone to bouts of anger or gloom. The rebellious persona he embodied in songs like Folsom Prison Blues began to blur with reality. The first major scandal erupted in 1965 when Cash got arrested in El Paso, Texas. He'd been returning from Mexico carrying hundreds of pills stashed in his guitar case. Although the officials concluded he wasn't exactly trafficking narcotics, the headlines roared, "Johnny Cash busted for smuggling drugs." It was a blow to his public image, but in a twisted way, it also fed into his outlaw mystique. Fans, especially the younger ones, saw him as a real rebel, not just a singer who pretended to be one in lyrics. However, the addiction was real, and so were the consequences. That same year, he faced a damaging scandal in Lafayette, Georgia, where he was arrested for public drunkenness after a car wreck. The local sheriff found Cash disoriented. The press jumped on that story too, painting a picture of a star who couldn't keep himself in line. All the while, the cracks in his marriage with Vivian Liberto deepened. They had 4 daughters together, but the constant touring and drug use wove a wedge between them. Complicating matters further was June Carter, a singer from the famed Carter family, whom Cash met during the mid-1950s on the country music circuit. They shared stages, sang duets, and formed a bond that teetered on the brink of something more intimate. Cash, hopped up on pills, wearing black suits that matched his bleary moods, found solace in June's warmth and humor. She tried to keep him grounded, but lines were crossed. Their affair simmered in gossip columns, overshadowing both their existing marriages. Vivian tried to salvage the relationship, but she also resented the overshadowing presence of June, who seemed better equipped to handle Johnny's moods, or at least more tolerant of his chaos. By 1966, the rumor mill was unstoppable. Cash and Carter were a couple in all but name. The final blow came in 1967 when Vivian filed for divorce, citing infidelity and emotional desertion. The tabloids devoured every detail, from her heartbreak over the affair to Cash's alleged drug-induced neglect of his children. Then, on March 1st, 1968, Johnny Cash and June Carter married, solidifying the romance that had begun as a scandal but would later become a legend of American music. This wedding, while joyous for fans who love seeing them sing Jackson and Ring of Fire on stage, also crystallized the memory that they had ignited their love by burning through 2 previous marriages. During his darkest addiction period between 1966 and 1968, Cash nearly died more than once. In 1967, depressed and guilt-ridden, he drove to Nickajack Cave near Chattanooga. The plan was to crawl into its recesses and vanish, an act of slow suicide by starvation or dehydration. He'd grown weary of the pills, the failures, the sense of hypocrisy. Yet inside that cold darkness, he had what he later described as a spiritual awakening. He felt God's presence urging him out. Emerging from the cave, half-dazed, he encountered June Carter, who had come searching. That night they prayed together, forging a new vow to fight the demons of addiction. Then in 1968, another near-fatal overdose hammered home how fragile his existence had become. He collapsed unconscious after injecting too many amphetamines. Carter found him in time, nursed him until he could breathe again, and refused to let him vanish so easily. These episodes, frequently retold, added a stark dimension to his image. He was no mere rockabilly rebel or moody country star. He was a soul wrestling with life and death, a man who had confronted the abyss and stepped back from it. And yet, while grappling with personal turmoil, Cash's career soared anew. He recorded the legendary At Folsom Prison album in January 1968, standing before the very inmates he used to sing about. The applause from those hardened men was raw, real, and made the album an instant cultural phenomenon. He followed that success with At San Quentin in 1969. Now, he was the outlaw hero with a battered moral compass, but a genuine empathy for prisoners, outcasts, and the down and out. Alongside that empathy, he championed issues like Native American rights. His 1964 concept album, Bitter Tears, Ballads of the American Indian, had been overshadowed by his addictions. But by the late 1960s, he resurrected that cause. He spoke openly in interviews, condemning how the U.S. government treated indigenous peoples, or how the prison system needed humane reforms. This frankness alarmed some in the conservative country music establishment, who felt politics had no place in their neat world of sentimental ballads. Others in the industry whispered that Cash was losing commercial sense, chasing radical ideals. He responded by doubling down, wearing black on stage as a statement of solidarity with the marginalized, a sartorial choice that would become iconic. Some radio programmers boycotted him, but fans respected the authenticity. The tension only solidified his image as a maverick, not quite left-wing, not quite right-wing, just fiercely independent and unafraid to speak his mind. Though in 1968 he managed to get clean for a time, the 1970s saw a relapse into occasional drug use. Maybe the old patterns were too etched in muscle memory. Perhaps the pressures of stardom never fully let up. One small but symbolic scandal took place in 1970 at Starkville, Mississippi, sometimes erroneously reported as Starkville or conflated with other incidents. He was arrested for picking flowers while intoxicated, or so the local police report allegedly said. The official story varied. Some said he was under the influence, wandering around, perhaps tearing up private property. Cash laughed it off as a trivial misunderstanding, but the broader issue was that old habits were creeping back. This time, though, the press paid comparatively little attention, maybe because the public had grown used to hearing about his run-ins, or because country music was in the midst of bigger transformations. The small fiasco underscored the fact that he'd never fully shaken off his addictive behaviors. June Carter's presence mitigated the damage, but the ghost of addiction lurked. He continued recording, touring, and hosting a TV variety show, The Johnny Cash Show, 1969 to 1971, showcasing guests like Bob Dylan and Ray Charles. The tensions with the music industry endured. Some folks labeled him too outspoken, too inconsistent, or just too chaotic for the polished Nashville scene. But fans treasured the unpredictability, the sense that at any moment he might drop a polite facade and speak raw truth into the microphone. Through the 1980s and 1990s, he weathered the changing tides of country music. A new generation, enthralled by pop country crossovers, sometimes relegated him to the status of an elder statesman. He parted ways with Columbia Records after nearly 3 decades, rummaging for a creative spark in smaller labels. Then came the American Recordings era in the 1990s, courtesy of producer Rick Rubin, which introduced Cash to an entirely new audience of rock and alternative fans. Stripped-down acoustic sets, covers of modern rock songs, and that same rumbling voice, now older, etched with every heartbreak and failure, found resonance with listeners who recognized authenticity above all else. Tracks like his cover of Nine Inch Nails' Hurt in 2002 felt like an open-soul confession. By then, the man had faced so many personal storms, addiction, heartbreak, arrest, near-death episodes, that each lyric seemed to bleed truth. The old scandals, once tabloid fodder, took on a tragic hero dimension. People realized that the man in black persona was no marketing ploy. It was the end product of decades of wrestling with his own darkness. In May 2003, June Carter died after complications from heart surgery. Cash was devastated. Their partnership had been a beacon of stability even amid turbulent times. The love story that began as a scandalous affair in the 1960s had evolved into a bedrock of mutual support. Despite their ups and downs, they remained together for 35 years. Without her, Cash was said to be a ship lost at sea, quietly waiting. He still recorded, though. By that point, his own health was precarious: diabetes, autonomic neuropathy, heart and respiratory troubles. As he shuffled around his home, greeting old friends or strumming his guitar, the final curtain felt imminent. On September 12, 2003, just 4 months after June's passing, Johnny Cash died at Baptist Hospital in Nashville. Official cause: complications from diabetes, with heart failure and respiratory failure all factoring in. The man who had worn black for the downtrodden bowed out, leaving a void in country music that no one could fill. His funeral, held on September 15, 2003, was a grand but solemn affair at the First Baptist Church in Hendersonville, near Nashville. Over 1,500 people showed up, a mix of old-school country legends like Chris Christopherson, modern chart toppers, political figures including Al Gore, and ordinary fans who had found hope in Cash's songs. Many recounted personal anecdotes, stories of how Cash had visited them in prison or given them money when they were down on their luck. The coffin was draped with black, symbolic of the brand he carried for so long. June Carter had been buried just months earlier, so the heartbreak was fresh. That day they laid him to rest beside her at the Hendersonville Memory Gardens. The eulogies evoked an epic American tale: a sharecropper's son, battered by addiction and doubt, who rose to be a universal voice for the disinherited. The tabloids that once reveled in his arrests and affairs were overshadowed by tributes to his compassion and grit. In the aftermath, the rest of the 2000s saw a surge of renewed interest in his life story. The album, American 4, The Man Comes Around, released shortly before his death, soared in popularity, anchored by that haunting Hurt video in which Cash, frail and reflective, examined his life's wreckage. Then the film Walk the Line premiered in 2005, starring Joaquin Phoenix and Reese Witherspoon, dramatizing the scandalous beginnings of his romance with June Carter and the downward spiral of pills and missed obligations. The movie captured the core tension, the extraordinary passion of a man who penned timeless songs, but who also, behind stage curtains, collapsed from the weight of self-destructive impulses. People who had only known him as a country star from their parents' generation discovered the rawness that never truly left him. The question remains: how did the man who claimed to be saved in Nickajack Cave keep stumbling into drug relapses and arrests? The answer might lie in the complexity of addiction and the demands of stardom. Some say the fundamental restlessness that spurred his creativity also fueled his self-destruction. He needed extremes: extreme empathy for prisoners, extreme defiance of social norms, extreme love for June, extreme longing for spiritual redemption, and that carried over to substances. The synergy of darkness and light was always in tension. Those who worked with him recall that even in later years, with June by his side, he would occasionally slip. Maybe it was the ghost of insomnia from decades earlier, or maybe it was the perpetual ache of a boy who lost his brother too soon and never fully forgave himself. His image as an outlaw was partly shaped by these scandals. The 1965 bust in El Paso, the 1966 drunken crash, the repeated near overdoses, the rumored meltdown in Georgia. He once said that he felt more empathy with criminals and addicts than with the squeaky clean. Indeed, the success of his prison concerts validated that connection. Inmates who saw him recognized a kindred spirit, not some celebrity offering platitudes. It's striking that a man so publicly chastised by churches, record labels, even his first wife, still carried a spiritual longing. He recorded gospel albums, conversed openly about Christ, balanced the gritty with the divine. That duality was central to his persona. In one interview, he said he wore black, partly as a protest against the ways society turned a blind eye to suffering. He didn't pretend to be perfect. He just championed the flawed and the broken, himself included. Even after death, the tributes and renewed interest in his discography never overshadowed the memory of his controversies. Fans remain fascinated by the messy details. The affair with June that ended 2 families, the car wrecks that could have turned fatal, the nights in jails from coast to coast, the humiliating mugshots. Some critics argue that these incidents overshadowed his artistry. Others insist that without these struggles, the artistry wouldn't be half as potent. "I Walk the Line" might never have rung so true if the singer hadn't teetered off that line repeatedly. Folsom Prison Blues might not have resonated so deeply if the singer didn't carry guilt in his own soul. Ring of Fire, famously penned or co-penned by June, was said to depict the scorching passion of their affair, one that devoured them both until they emerged either sanctified or burned. Through it all, the press latched on to every scandal, shaping the narrative of Cash as the rebellious saint, the man who tested moral boundaries but found redemption in gospel fervor and a woman's unwavering love. His final years present a poignant epilogue, battling ill health, partly from a life of punishing his body with substances, partly from genetics, partly from heartbreak. After June Carter's death, it was as though a piece of his heart was carved out. He pressed on, still recording, but told friends that he felt his time was short. The haunting Hurt video stands as a testament to that realization. Cash in black trembling hands, sitting at a table in his House of Cash museum, singing about regret and ephemeral achievements. Interspersed shots of him in younger days reveal the cyclical nature of life's highs and lows. The video went viral before viral was truly a thing, reaching a younger generation who discovered him not as a toothless old country singer, but as an archetype of raw authenticity. When the funeral ended on that day in September 2003, the thousands of admirers departed Hendersonville Memory Gardens, and the chapters of scandal receded into memory. The broader world now embraced the entire tapestry of who Johnny Cash was. The contradictory patchwork of sins and virtues, cruelty and compassion. The man in black had left the stage, but the chorus of his life's controversies still reverberated, a testament that sometimes the greatest artistry arises from forging music out of one's darkest nights. People recall those sensational headlines about pill arrests, near suicides, the affair that upended 2 marriages, the outlaw persona. But they also remember the quiet moments, him strumming a guitar for a child, or standing up for inmates' rights when no one else dared, or championing the cause of Native Americans with a lonely but fervent voice. That's the paradox that made him compelling. More than a typical hero, more than a typical villain. A man who might have destroyed himself a dozen times over, but who persevered ironically to the ripe age of 71. In the end, the name Johnny Cash stands for a narrative so many see reflected in themselves. The struggle between darkness and salvation. The times we stumble and the times we stand again. The controversies that shook his life, his addiction, the affair with June Carter, the near-death episodes and repeated arrests did not define him so much as reveal him. They peeled back any pretenses of manufactured stardom to expose raw human vulnerability. Cash wore black, as he said, for the poor, for prisoners, for those beaten down by life, but he also wore it for himself, for the unending moral wrestling he faced every day. That's why, even decades after his passing, the scandal-laced chapters of his story continue to fascinate. They remind us that sometimes greatness is paid for in heartbreak and haunted nights. He was never just an entertainer. He was a mirror that reflected our own flaws, convictions, and longing for redemption. So as you watch old footage of Johnny Cash picking at his guitar strings, or listen to that low, weary voice declare, "I'm the man in black," remember the man behind the stage lights. The arrests were real. The near overdoses were real. The heartbreak of leaving one wife for another and the sense of sin that gnawed at him were real. The political stances that alienated half his audience were real too. Yet through it all, he continued to sing with a sincerity rarely matched in American music. The final note was struck on September 12th, 2003, but that was only the coda to a life so bursting with tension it felt almost biblical. The next time you hear Folsom Prison Blues or I Walk the Line, let the knowledge of these controversies linger in your mind, not to judge him, but to appreciate the cost of forging songs that crackle with lived experience. The tragedies, the stumbles, and the chaos were the furnace that shaped his voice, his identity, and his fearless empathy. Johnny Cash's scandal-laden life is not a footnote. It's the abiding heartbeat of his legacy, proof that music can rise from the lowest, scariest places, and that sometimes a man has to burn so close to the edge before he finds the clarity to sing.